Hey guys, welcome back to the Motor Madhouse podcast. Back for yet another episode. My name is Mike, joined by my good buddy Steve. Steve, how you doing?
Pretty good, Mike. Thanks for having me again.
Good, good. So, what's new in the world of cars?
Oh, not a lot. I mean, right now in Wisconsin, we're looking at this huge blizzard tomorrow. We'll see what ends up being. So all my stuff's kind of put away, but just kind of waiting on that. I have some thoughts on a project that maybe we'll talk about some other day, but I have a particular four-door BMW, and I think one day we're gonna have to put a V8 in it. So, but that's been consuming my mind a little bit in cars.
Sounds fun. Yeah, my week's been consumed with this Snowmageddon coming tonight. So, I plow snow, so I had to get my plow truck ready, which hasn't been driven on the road since last winter, maybe spring a little bit. But just getting the plow on, and the plow is behind a car that hasn't been started in months. I had to jump that car and pull that out of the way, and then fight the plow on for 45 minutes, and debated quitting and just not plowing anymore for about 10 minutes, and then said, no, let's just figure it out. And got it back going and got it on. But then that was 2 days ago, and then today I got ready to I do a change of tire on my truck because I got a flat last year, so I had a new tire and went to go put it on and could not find my truck keys for a good 30 minutes. I mean, usually it's like, they're somewhere around, but after about 15 minutes, I was like, did the kids put it in the garbage can? Like, what happened? They're gone. Like, the penalty for not having these keys is pretty substantial.
Yeah, a lot of dollars,
a lot of
time.
Yeah, disappointed people and reputation. So luckily I found them. I had a pry bar and a giant 22-inch channel locks, so it's not back in its place. But I had set them aside and on a car cover for my lawnmower, like little tow behind wagon, and set it off to the side. Went to go jump the other car to pull it inside, and found in my detached garage buried. But it was a nice little panic attack for no reason.
I've had plenty of cars where I only have one key for it. I'm just like, this is such a bad idea. And then I never do anything about that. I just kind of live that bad choice for a while. I've been lucky so far, but
so yeah, we'll see how this goes, but probably have to get up super early to start plowing. So anyways, you had another good idea for an episode today, and probably a continuing segment, the best cars of each decade, which is you can go deep on each one. So I'm sure same thing. I'm gonna be worried about you overlapping picks and everything. But at the same time, there's so many to pick from, and we come from different backgrounds.
Well, we talked about this earlier today. So then I have cars that are my favorites from the 80s, but sorry, I already said the decade, but that's fine. I picked the 80s because it's my generation, or when I was born, right? So I'm like, oh, that'll be an interesting one. But I have cars that I think are the best, but I'm like, you know what? I should pick some ones that are just like different than Mike's going to pick, right? So like some things that I know maybe a bit more about we could talk about. So that'd be interesting.
Yeah. So like you said, it's going to be the 1980s on this episode. And I'm kind of glad we're doing this one first because it's probably my least favorite of every decade. See, I was actually...
Go ahead. I was going to say, yeah, you got to think about what's happening in the 80s, right? So like getting out of the oil crisis, right? Kind of barely. So kind of going through that whole deal, and all the manufacturers they were getting out of making compact cars, getting back into the kind of a little bit bigger cars that had V8s in them again, but they were so restrained by emissions and different things that are coming out that they were making 140 horse out of a V8, right? Just like wild stuff. So,
right. And then even just the styling, like, I mean, for instance, like the logo for the podcast, my 59 Buick LeSabre. Look at a 1980 LeSabre. That's only 21 years later. Like, name any car today that looked cooler 21 years ago. No. I mean, the 1980s, like the ugliest thing ever made. I mean, it's just, you could sculpt all the body panels out of like plywood. There's no design. There's no creativity. It's kind of just make a vehicle, put a name on it, and put a crazy underpowered, terrible gas mileage motor in it. and it was just an interesting time for kind of things to go backwards. And unlike you, I was actually born the 9th month of 1990. So I wasn't even conceived in the 80s. So
No.
and not to blame for anything that happened in that decade. So let's get that out of the way.
Yeah. And it's not like I was driving in the 80s, so it's not like I was hanging out with any of these cars necessarily. I was 84 or so, but still, when I was growing up in the 90s, like cars in the 80s weren't that old. It'd be like for us right now, a car from the teens, right? But yeah, I don't know if you want to get started on it or if you want me to, or how you want to go.
I'll let you go first, just because we might have some overlap. I feel like the ones I'm going to have might be predictable for you because I got to kind of stick to what I know.
Okay.
So I'm going to let you start, and I bet you're going to have some things that I don't know much about, so I'm ready to learn.
So I'm going to start with the one that I'm pretty certain you probably don't know a ton about. And I'm picking it, and I very easily could have picked the 1980s. From the 1980s, I could have picked the E30 M3. So that's kind of like the godfather to German sports sedans, right? And it started it all. But the kind of unknown car that actually got BMW to make the E30 M3 is the Mercedes 190E 2.3 16. So later on, though, they upgraded it. So it was the Mercedes-Benz 190E 2.5 16. German's not very creative with their name. So it's a 2.5 liter motor, 16 valve. So I don't know if you want to share it. I can kind of keep talking about it because it'll probably be hard for me to kind of search that. But 190E 2.5 16V. And this was created. They had this car and they wanted to get into world rally racing. And
190E.
Yep, 2.5 16.
And what year is this?
I think they did it from like 84 to like 82.
Okay, so they'll pull it up.
Yep. So they originally were going to do this car to enter in the World Rallying Championship with Audi and Toyota and all of them that were in it. They got going on it. They had Cosworth built this motor. They made a ton of power with it. And just as they were getting ready to do it, Audi came out with their Quattro cars, all-wheel drive cars. Would have just decimated this thing. It was rear-wheel drive, right? So Mercedes scrapped it. They're like, no, we're not going to be in racing anymore. We're not going to do any of this. And secretly, kind of behind the executives' eyes, there was a group starting a sport package of this car because Mercedes said, you can't race anymore. We're not doing racing. We're over. And they made this sport package version of this car. And people started buying it on their own for DTM racing, for a touring car. And this is kind of like almost like the equivalent of the heydays of NASCAR when it was actually like the car that you bought was pretty much in the race. DTM racing touring cars were like the 80s German cars that you could actually buy. So people started buying up these Mercedes and they started winning. It was winning year over year over year. And BMW had to make a competition car to it. So they made the M3. And then Mercedes noticed. And then they started backing it and just really putting a bunch of money into this car. So it ended up being not impressive by today's numbers. Like I think it was about 180 horse, if I remember correctly. But as a race car, it was great. And do you know what a dogleg transmission is? I'm assuming.
Yeah. I've heard the term, but no, I don't.
So typical transmissions first are forward and far to the left, right? In a dogleg transmission, it's actually back and to the left. And the reason for this is when you're on a racetrack, you're often going between 2 and 3 on tighter tracks. So it's set up that way. So your 2 to 3 shifts are a straight line. So it had a dogleg transmission, which was just a little bit different. And it was just built to run forever. So they actually made it to do these endurance races as well. And I want to say the one that they still to this day hold the record in, and actually I can look this up, was 31,000 miles at an average of 154 miles per hour. So nonstop is fast. And that's including oil changes, tire changes, gas fill-ups, everything. 31,000 miles nonstop at an average of 154,000 miles, which has to be a production car. And then you can just imagine pretty soon nobody will ever beat that because how are you going to get an EV to do that, right? So, but So just a super impressive car that no one's ever heard of. And there's very, very rare. Not very many came to the US, just enough like so they could say that they made it, right? So they could enter into these races. But really started the whole thing because of this. The M3 came out because of this. Audi S4 came out and essentially made sports sedans what they are today. We wouldn't have CTSVs. We wouldn't have Blackwings. None of this would exist without this car getting started. So, but yeah, I think that's the coolest car of the 80s.
Yeah, that's wild. So what was, I guess my main question is, what was regulation like in Europe in this time period? Because I think that's what killed American performance. We had all these EPA regulations with gas mileage in the 70s, and then safety bumpers and all this stuff kind of made performance not a priority. So what was going on in Germany and Italy and all the other Ford manufacturers?
I wouldn't say I know as much about it, but I do know that they were less about emissions because of their fuel costs were so much higher. That was more how they really drove this, because they let people decide if you want a fuel efficient car, you wanted to get it because the fuel was so much more expensive, right?
Funny how that works. Yeah.
right.
Let the market decide.
Yeah. Safety was more about safety of the interior, of the car. So like that was a big demand for this car, that had to be as safe as any other Mercedes. But again, they didn't have the same regulations around like pedestrian safety at the time. Honestly, now is a much different story. Like into the 2000s, they got very big into that, and they're actually even more serious about that than America is at this point. So that's why it's like really hard to have a F-150 over there to actually pass safety, because it would just, decimate a person if it hit them. But
Right.
but yeah, they were on the fuel and like exhaust pipe emissions, they were a little bit more laid back at this time. So
Okay, well, I'll jump into my first one. Once again, none of these are my like favorite cars. None of these are like on my bucket list to buy. I mean, maybe a couple I would definitely buy. Like I've looked them up in the past a couple times, but this one in particular, I have a little more of a sentimental attachment to. One of my dad's best friends, giant car guy, he has had a couple of these things. And one year we went to Buick Grand Sport Nationals down in Bowling Green, Kentucky, when I was probably 14. I couldn't drive yet, but we had to, he bought another car when he was down there. So my dad and I had to drive this car all the way home from Kentucky back to Northern Illinois. So we spent a good, 8-9 hours in this thing. And I went into it not being a fan of 80s cars. I was like, no, cars were cool in the 60s and 70s. They got lame until the 90s again. That was my mindset at that age. And I rode in this thing and I was like, whoa, this thing's kind of fun. And it was it was the only car. You think I gave it away saying Buick Nationals, but it's not a GNX.
Ooh, okay. That's I was going that direction, to be honest.
Yeah, right. It's the only car they let into Buick Nationals that's not a Buick, only because it's Buick powered, and that's the 1989 Trans Am anniversary car.
My uncle has.
So this, oh really? So this was the only time the Trans Am was ever offered in a 6-cylinder.
Yep.
And it was the 20th anniversary, and they borrowed the motor from the 87 GNX. So they're all made white. I think they all have the same tan interior. Some might have had black. I'm not 100% sure. But they were pretty outstanding performance for their time. I think he was running at the drag strip there. I think he was hitting consistent 13.7s, and the car was 24 years old at this time. So I was kind of watching that, and then we were driving at home, and on the highway when you get that turbo lag and then it hits, and like I went into it being like, "Oh, we're taking a little 6-banger home." I was a big muscle car guy.
Oh yeah,
and I kind of shut my mouth real fast when we got on it a couple times. I was like, "Whoa, this thing!"
Yeah, that 3.8 was it was a monster slayer. Like even it was faster than the Corvette at the time. I don't know if this car was fast.
Oh,
yeah, this probably would have been faster than the C4 as well, right?
Oh yeah. The TPI motors and the whatever.
Yeah.
Was it the Crossfire was later, I think, but yeah, there was the 350s and small Chevys weren't quite matching that. That was probably the fastest GM car of the 80s was the GNX in this, with a 6-cylinder.
And these are automatic only, I think.
Yep.
Yep.
They both were. But then the 3.8 went on to be a legend of its own. I mean, there's just one of the most bulletproof motors ever made. It's the 6-cylinder equivalent of the small block Chevy. And, when I was watching these GNXs and Grand Nationals and T-types running when we were at the drag strip, it kind of really changed my mind on these things because there's guys hitting 8s in these things back in the early 2000s with the Grand Nationals and stuff with turbo 6-bangers. I'm just going, whoa, like these things it's one thing to be like, oh no, V8s are great. And the 455 is the biggest Buick motor ever made. And then you watch it destroy a 70 Buick going, man, I don't see many guys running those times. It was pretty eye opening, but I've always had kind of a soft spot. I mean, these, for these cars after having one around, but I would definitely buy one if I came across one for a decent price.
I think they look kind of cool, to be honest. And I obviously, setting this exact year aside, I think I could enjoy doing a motor swap one of these. I've seen some like LS swapped ones or LSA swapped cars, and they just look bad. Like they just look so cool. Like
yeah, they've grown on me. One of my best friends in high school had a 87 IROC that his dad bought new. It was a 305 TPI 5-speed. It was a real cool, like Le Mans blue. And it was such a shame. His dad bought it new, had 57,000 miles on it, gave it to him when he was 16, and he just ran it into the ground. I mean, it was just, by the time he was done with it, the hood was flat black, scrape everywhere. Cigarette burns in the seats. It was just trash. I think he eventually smoked the clutch on it, sat in a barn for 4 years, and they sold it for nothing. But it was a car that someone would pay a lot of money for when he first inherited it when he was 16. So that was kind of a shame. But I've never been a big third gen guy, but between the memories of cruising around in his car and this one, they're starting to grow on me as I'm getting older. I'm starting to get that nostalgic feel.
That was the era of cars too, where you went back to a carb, right? Like if you had a third gen with TPI, you did a swap back to having a carb. Actually, made some good power out of it, right? But that's a good one. I kind of forgot about that existing, but I remember my uncle telling about his and that he had the 3.8. I'm like, oh, that's not really. And I was in high school at the time, and I was just like, well, that's not that cool. And then realizing what it was years later, and him telling me, I'm like, oh, okay, yeah, that's.
Does he still have it?
I think he got rid of it a while ago. Like it was one of those things that he bought at like 4 years old. Like he didn't pay a lot of money for it, and he just sat in his barn and he drove it every once in a while. But I think something like 5 years ago he got rid of it. One of those things. I wish I would have thought about it more when I was in high school. But like, hey, can I hold on to that forever?
Well, they're still not crazy. They're definitely expensive now, but they're not.
Oh yeah.
They're. I think you can get a good one from like between 35 and 50 grand right now. So
yeah, I think the GNXs went. The GNXs went way higher, right?
Yeah, I've seen them hit 200 grand with super low miles. That's a whole different animal.
Yeah, I remember seeing like. It was called the T-type back then, right? When it wasn't the GNX, they had the T-type.
The T-type was below the Grand National. So you had Regal T-type, then Grand National, and GNX is 1 year only, 97 or 87.
Yep, I remember seeing those around like all the time. Like it was just common, not all the time, but like it wouldn't be weird to see one once a week.
Oh, right? Just G bodies in general. Yeah.
Well, either T-types or sometimes you'd see a GN. I think I've seen one GNX not at a car show, and that was back in like the early 2000s, and I forgot the number on it, but there wasn't a ton of them. I think there was only like 500 or so made.
Yeah, it was low. Yeah. I've never seen one outside of a car show or auction, to be honest. You don't see them at Walmart. You're out cruising.
Yeah. Well, I already, this is actually in the old Walmart in town here, is where I saw it, but it was back then. Again, it was just kind of an old car. It wasn't like it was maybe 15, 16 years old at the time. So it wasn't a super big collector yet. Right. But
I stand corrected.
Yep. I actually assumed you were going to pick the GNX. That was where I thought you were going. So,
and I knew you were going to assume it. So I didn't.
That was the same reason I didn't go with that one either. So, but
this one's
good.
I'll say this one kind of counts as a GNX adjacent.
Yeah, that's a good one. So speaking of which, I did pick a G-body car. But I went a different direction. I picked this as my favorite because my friend's dad had a 1986, and it was a 442. And if you knew anything about these ones, which I know, I think you know a little bit about, obviously the older 442s, but these were not stellar performance cars by any means.
Right.
I think they had a 307
Yep.
in them, and 442 had like so many different meanings throughout the years. And I think at this time it was just 4-barrel carb, 4-speed automatic, dual exhaust, right? I think earlier on it might have been like the 400 motor that I had in it, and then they had a 4-speed manual, and But again, not a fast car, but it was like the car that kind of made me realize that people collected cars and took care of them. And like, my friend's dad was washing the thing all the time. He had a custom license plate for it. So it kind of just got us into it, and it would do burnouts. It was a big comfy machine. And it just kind of what got me into thinking about cars that way. And I remember we had big plans for that thing after it was sold to one of his sons. He had 3 sons. I was kind of friends with all of them, but never really got there with it. But I still, every time I see like a Hearst Olds or the Olds 442 or even the Monte Carlos, I kind of think, oh, wouldn't mind grabbing up one of those. Did you ever have any 442s, or your dad?
Of G-body generation?
Well, any 442s.
Oh yeah. So, I mean, I have a 70 Cutlass in my garage now. It's my dad's.
Yeah.
That's his parts car. Yeah, I learned to drive stick in a 70 W30 when I was 11.
Yep.
Sebring yellow 4-speed. I would guesstimate he's probably had at least 40, 68 to 72.
Okay, so that's his car.
Yeah.
That's he's in those.
Oh yeah, that's his bread and butter. I mean, he's
Yeah.
probably partial to Oldsmobile over GTOs, Grand Sports, Chevelles. He's had them all, but that's his one. He still has his first one ever, a 70 convertible 442. Yeah, it's been 1,000 pieces since I was born, but it's still there. He's restored dozens since, but that one he hasn't got to.
So did you know about the 442 is that they made one after the G-body? So early 90s.
In the 90s? I think like on the Cutlass platform.
It was awful. They should have never, ever done it. I think at that point it had the Quad 4, which is like GM's 4-cylinder, and it was a 4-speed auto again. And I forgot, I don't think the two standard for twin cam, because it didn't necessarily have dual exhaust. So what a sad end to that car. They probably could have just not done that. So
the car you're talking about in particular is an 86 442 or Hearst Olds?
Yes. Yeah, 86 442 was I'm gonna put that in as one of my favorites. I think that's just
okay.
And they had that darker blue. That's I think in that first one there. But just super cool car.
This color.
Yeah. Yep, exactly.
Yeah.
I remember those wheels. Yeah.
Yep. So it's nostalgia. It's probably the same thing that makes me, like the ones that are older, only because I kind of grew up around those things. Like when I see the rear quarter on a 7442 or the rear tail lights, like it reminds me of my dad, so that's always going to be. And then that's not one of those cars where it's like, how did the styling go backwards? Like it's a cool looking car, but it's nowhere near 68 to 72 or even, 66 or 7 or anything prior. It's just kind of weird how the cars, the styling just kind of fell off the map. It's like they just kind of farmed that project out to, whoever else that was new at GM.
Well, it's interesting how like similar everything looks to, like in time periods, like, and obviously all the G bodies look the same. That's like a whole different story, right? But like everything in the 80s kind of had this weird wedge box shape to it, right? Even that Mercedes, you could quickly tell that was from the 80s. And if you look at an 80s BMW, it looked the same, right? So, and now same thing. You look at any new car, they all look identical, right? So, but
307 Olds is probably one of the most underpowered V8s ever made. I don't know the exact specs, but my dad said he had a station wagon that was could not get out of its own way. Like every old lady in school has to go by.
I'm pretty sure my friend's mom had the station wagon with that motor in it too. Like they had both of those cars, and yeah, they were a bit gutless for sure. But like at that point, like yeah, at that point in my life, like anything was cool, right? Like my first vehicle was a truck that had a V6 in it. So like to have 180 horse in a car, like, or whatever it was back then, like hell yeah, that was awesome, right?
Oh yeah. Yeah, it's all about what you're around when you get introduced to cars and kind of what's like, ooh, I like this about that. Like these wheels look kind of racy, and this, these stripes and all that, it kind of grabs you as a kid. So no, I totally understand that.
And the other thing too, like, and this maybe doesn't apply so much with this car, is I always say this to my friends: it's more fun to drive a slow car fast than a fast car slow, right? So you could just drive the hell out of one of these, or really any car from the 80s, and you're barely breaking the speed limit. The thing's leaning all over the place. Like it's one tire spinning. It's just
the only thing that sucks is you're getting the same gas mileage as a car that has a lot of horsepower.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Yep. But yeah, exactly. So all right, leave it to you now.
Okay, so this one I debated it back and forth to even include, because to call it the best is completely inaccurate. It has nothing to do with good at all. It's purely just I love it. And I don't think I'm alone. And I mean, when I was a kid, there's a certain movie I got obsessed with that a lot of people got obsessed with, and it's the good old DeLorean.
Ooh, that is a good pick. I kind of forgot about that.
Terrible car. So it's kind of misleading in the title of this episode to call it the best, but you got to understand there's once again some sentimental stuff here. John DeLorean invented the Pontiac GTO. So I was already in, like, this was my guy. It was my favorite up, and then learn more about him. And it turns out he started his own company after he left GM. And then Back to the Future came out. And I mean, I watched those three movies hundreds of times before I was 10 years old. I mean, over and over and over. It was just my favorite movie. And the movie car looks way cooler than the real ones, of course. But the stainless steel, the gull wing doors, he had such good intentions with this car, but just a perfect storm of nothing going right led to be like just one of the most catastrophic failures that should have been included on the last episode. But it wasn't really a model. It was also a manufacturer, and that's kind of what we were not doing in that episode. But
what was the motor that they
what were they, like 100 and it's some crazy, gosh, get me off guard here, but it was some kind of, not a Zuzu, but something like that. Some of the P. It was some foreign motor that just, I mean, no power. The thing literally could not hit 88 miles an hour in real life. It was.
Yeah, I remember reading that about it.
Yeah.
And the stainless steel body obviously didn't help. They were fairly heavy, I think, for their size.
Yeah,
right?
Probably expensive to manufacture. But, had he just done this before the EPA stuff happened, like if he was doing this in 1970 instead of GTOs, like what would it have been, like what kind of, or in the 90s, once kind of 92 or later, once the Vipers and the LS motors were getting developed, like what would this thing have been? It was just the wrong car at the wrong time. But
I'm trying to think when this fell in line with the Pontiac Fiero, right? Like, was that pretty similar?
This is 82 right? Or 81. 81, I think, was the first year DeLorean, and I think 84 Fiero, maybe.
They just remind me similar-ish, right? Rear engine, or is it mid-engine? I can't remember right now, but
yeah, it's rear engine. Available in auto or manual, so that's pretty cool.
Yeah.
But and the other thing is, like, had Back to the Future come out when this thing was in production, it probably would have sold a ton of them. It wasn't made till these things just failed. So it was kind of funny how the car company went under and then it became just an icon. I mean, it's arguably up there with the most famous. It's right there with the General Lee or Christine or Bullet Mustang. It's probably number one up there.
Oh yeah, I mean, yeah. For cars that make you think about a particular movie, I'd have to say yeah, that has to take the cake, right? Like
It's
what
so
other
funny
car
you bring
makes
this.
what's that?
I said it's so funny you bring this up too, like for this episode idea, because I forgot I had a really like crazy dream last night that I woke up and I almost Googled it because it seemed so realistic. I had a dream that Elon Musk bought the rights to DeLorean to redevelop an EV DeLorean with all modern tech inside of it. And I was like, oh, that was a dream, but that totally sounds plausible. Like
Oh,
he's crazy enough to do
100%.
something like that. Maybe it's
I mean
because it resembles the Cybertruck so much.
yeah, exactly. I saw a comparison where they're comparing the DeLorean to the Cybertruck and how just crazy the idea was, but they did it anyways, kind of thing. So.
Yeah, he's like the if John DeLorean was successful, kind of equivalent of our generation.
Yeah. Yeah. I another one of these cars I've only seen these at car shows, never seen one just going around. But I don't know if anybody has ever done any wild mods to them either, like if they've ever been swapped anything or just
Oh yeah,
honestly.
yeah.
Oh
They've
yeah.
done they've done a couple of LS swaps. The last season finale of Vice Grip or Roadworthy Rescues with Derek Bieri from Vice Grip Garage, he LS swapped one.
Jeez. So how does that work? Is he doing like the 5.3 that was in the front of the Monte Carlos or
No, they put it rear
LS?
facing because with the LS you can turn the intake around like on a boat. It's ambidextrous, and then it adapts to some kind of Porsche transmission. And there's an adapter plate. There's kits for it. People do it all the time apparently.
Wow.
So there's actually aftermarket support to convert DeLoreans to LSs. So he ordered the whole kit and like did it, and then he blew it up going on the drag strip at LS Fest on the first pass.
Oh man,
so never saw it was going to run.
I always wondered if people. That's probably obviously the better way to do it. But you remember I think Impala was actually what had the 5.3 in it for a short period of time. They had kind of that
Impala SS and the Pontiac GXP.
Yeah.
Yep.
I wonder if people were swapping those. I've seen people who swap. I saw a Cadillac actually. They took the North Star and they bolted into the back of a Nissan Maxima. Made a rear engine with that and got rid of all the front motor and everything. So just curious if people went that way with the DeLorean.
But, well, sure it could be done.
Yeah. So
all right, so your turn here.
Yeah, so I hesitate to say this, but again, maybe we're getting off the path of best, and I'm still gonna stick to it though because I think these trucks are cool, and I think that it opened up a lot for truck culture right now and like where people are at with these. So the 1988 Silverado. So I think they call these the CK generation, right? Or the GMT 400s.
Oh, okay.
Right. So this was the first year of those. They went until 1988. I happen to have a particular fondness again for these because my first vehicle was a Silverado like this. It was 5-speed manual, TBI motor. So, tons of power and just, no, that was awful. Actually, it was TBI. I think it was essentially a carburetor that had 2 little fuel injector pods that sat in the top of the carburetor. And, I spent a ton of money to try to make that fast. Like, I want to say that I probably put about $5,000 to $6,000 into a motor build, and I left it TBI because I was 17 and I thought that was a good idea. So I built a 350 for it. Stayed TBI, right? Did a high-rise intake manifold, and then adapted it back to this. Heads, valve springs, cam, high compression pistons, like everything. But if I would have just changed the fuel injection system, right, would have been good. But
I was trying to.
Go ahead.
I was trying to do the math on what year it was when you're 17 of how much a ZZ4 crate motor costs from GM Performance, but it's probably less than $5,000.
Yeah, honestly, and that's kind of where I should have went. I remember looking at magazines and being like, I could just buy a crate motor, and this would be a better way to do this, right?
But the learning experience of building it yourself, and that's priceless.
Right. But I mean, this is one of the first trucks that actually had a luxury trim meant something, right? Like cruise control and your standard power windows later on, right? And all that. And kind of started getting into where 4 doors are more popular later on too. And and people started to actually buy these to be their only vehicle, and drive them to work, right? And they're super popular right now. Like if you try to find one of these that's clean, you better have $15,000-$20,000 with you, right? Because they're pretty rare. But
yeah. I don't know trucks that well, so to be honest, I didn't know this generation was from the 80s. I thought they were all square bodies until like 90. So if I saw that, I would guess 93, 94.
Yeah, I sort of cheated with this
88.
one, right? It came in right at 88.
No, I mean I did an 89 Trans Am. So
that's true. But I've the motors later on, I think after 95, they went, which is now out of the 80s, obviously, but they went to a different fuel injection system. They had the Vortec heads on them and everything, and they were obviously a little bit more powerful, but never great power out of them. These are always the cars I reference when I talk about like how far motors have went, right? Because the 454 was offered in these later on, and I want to say it was like 230 horse. I could be wrong in that, but it was somewhere in the lower 200s. I mean, now four cylinder, my wife's 4-cylinder car over here makes 260, right? So it's just crazy how much things change in that bit of time. But then they had the 454 SS, which was also, I wouldn't say it was necessarily the start of the sport truck. I'd say Dodge probably took that with the Little Red Wagon, right? But definitely got things going with the Ford Lightning. I've driven one 454 SS, and it was okay. Like it was one of those things, like I was so into that platform that I was expecting it to be like change my life, but
don't meet your heroes, man.
Yeah, exactly. So your plow truck is a later gen of this, though, right?
Yeah, it's an 02, which that's actually kind of a pattern here. You're seeing nostalgia. My dad bought an 02 Silverado 3/4 ton, brand new. So that was one of those generations where they're changing the front end every year, like 2000, 2001. LS motors were coming into play. And then 02 to 03, like to me, I don't like the 03 to 06 GM or 07.5 GM front end where it kind of got that
a little
headlight.
Sharper.
So like the 02, I think they kind of hit their peak. Like 01 looked nice, but then 02, they actually sampled the grille from the 67 GTO. It's got the X pattern with the wave in it. So that's the first thing. Being a GTO guy, that's the first thing I picked up on. I was like, people probably don't realize this. This is exactly the same profile of a 67 GTO grill. They just expanded it. That was a brand new truck to me. It still feels new to me when I drive it. It's like, oh yeah, this is brand new. I remember going for a ride the first time I came back from the dealership. But yeah,
they're bulletproof too.
I like that truck.
We've got a 2001 on the farm with 214,000 miles, and my dad does not treat anything well. We probably put like 3,000 pounds in the bed of the thing, like dropped out of a tractor, right? Kind of stuff. Like, never changed the oil, all of that, and just goes every time. Just starts up, rides nice. Good trucks.
Yeah, mine's got 237 on it right now. I bought it with 220, and it's done nothing but pull trailers and yard work and plowing, mostly plowing since I bought it.
Yeah,
and it's just it asks for more no matter how much you give it.
Yeah, but those are one of those vehicles.
A little crusty.
I think about trying to find a 2-wheel drive one of those and making some kind of weird sleeper out of it, right? Like, I mean, which everybody's done already, but now everybody's moved on to the F-150s or the Coyotes. But
right. Yeah. So the last one, I almost didn't want to do this one because it's kind of predictable, but it's kind of got to be mentioned. And that's just, it kind of changed the game with performance cars. So that's the Fox Body Mustang. Before,
that probably literally is one of the better cars in the 80s, if I was to be honest, right?
Well, it just kind of reintroduced muscle cars back into the equation. I mean, you had the 6-cylinder stuff going on, but the true V8 rear-wheel drive, 2-door, no legroom in the back seat, just full-on muscle car. The cars started to get fast again. I mean, there were some dark years before this thing came out with the Mustang 2, and I've had a 71 Mustang, a 73 Mustang, and even those, like, It went backwards from the cool ones from the 60s and 1970. Like things started they didn't look as cool, and then they got slower and slower and uglier and uglier. And this was kind of the rebound where, this is such a great platform to this day. I mean, people just buy these things. We've talked about it before. LS swap, Coyote swap, Ford 9-inch in the back, just a lightweight, bulletproof chassis, and it looks aggressive. It looks cool. For a while, they were very overdone. I kind of got tired of them because when they were cheap, you saw them everywhere. So it's kind of like, I don't want to go to the drag strip and just see nothing but a bunch of 5-liter Mustangs going down the strip. But there's a reason why everyone was doing it. Back then, they were cheap, they were lightweight, and the modifications were endless. So this one, I think, was one of the most significant cars of the 80s just because it really kind of forced every competitor to step their game up. Some of the stuff we didn't mention, like, the GLH Shelby Mopars of this era and stuff, the Go Like Hell stood for. There's some weird stuff going on with 6 cylinders and 4 cylinders and turbos and all that. And this one kind of brought things back center. And it was like, nope, V8 rear wheel drive. Let's go. This is the performance car route. And then, then you get the ZR1 Mustang in the early 90s and all the Dodge Viper. I mean, everyone kind of had to step up. And I think this car's got a lot of credit due for that.
Yeah, and like you kind of said, they kind of became, you can mod them, do whatever you want. Obviously a lot of people went drag with them, but I mean, there's drift cars out of them, road race. I remember Maximum Motorsports is kind of the company in the 2000s, and honestly, they might still be working on different platforms, but they made some sick suspension setups for these, and they were pulling like into 1.2 Gs on a Fox body, right? I had a Fox body for a while in my garage. It was like a buddy and we kind of did this joint project on it. And the chassis was so soft on that one, though. Like if I jacked up the front, I remember I had to like tighten up the headers on it. I couldn't open the door anymore, right? Like it would just flex that much. But just iconic sound out of them. Like I love how the 5.0 sounds.
Yeah. Well, that's the other thing was the 5-liter. That was such those motors, you can make crazy power out of them. I mean, it was kind of like nothing else from that era besides the 3.8 Buick motor. There's guys that still race these things. There's still giant aftermarket support. There's no one doing TPI motors. No one with any sort of sense about them doing that. But the 5-liter is still a motor that people will go to and still build hot rods out of. So it's a car that just must be mentioned if we're on this topic.
Oh, for sure. Yeah. And I thought about it as well, but I'm like, I don't know. Like it almost seemed too obvious, but at the same time, like it has to be called out. Like, yeah, 100%.
Yep.
So, cool.
All right. Well, let's pivot into our weekly segment of cars that are bottomed out in the market. So if you have some money today that you want to buy a car, it's never going to be cheaper. Each week we pick a different car. So I'll let you go this time and see what
I've been trying to think of ones that are cheaper, and this one is not, but it also won't get cheaper. So I'm going to start say this one, and again, I'm going to try to get into a different theme here, but I know a lot about these cars. So it's called the E90 M3, which I drive an E90, so that's maybe why I like these. But also, the E90 M3 was BMW's only V8 M3. So the first one is a 4-cylinder. Next two are going to be 6 cylinders. And in 2000, I should probably remember this year better. 2007, 2008, they started the E90, which had essentially a V10 that they cut 2 cylinders out of from their M5. So it was low 400 horsepower, just a screamer. And like any car, right? There's a point where it becomes just an old car, and then it transitions into becoming a classic car. And that's kind of right where these are sitting. They're all getting close to 20 years old. A lot of them had rod bearing failures that hopefully were fixed, and if they've learned how to fix them well. But the way things are going, they right after that car, they went to a Turbo 6, and they've been staying on that path. Next BMW is going to be a hybrid of some sort for the M3. So if you really want that V8 like screamer, this is the only way you're ever going to get one. And it also still has like the feeling of a car, right? You have hydraulic steering, you have like, you can turn off all the nannies and, actually own the car the whole way and not have some electronic thing telling you how to drive. And it's not over complicated in any sense, other than the motor. but yeah, I have to say that's only going to go up, because that noise that motor makes, the way it screams up to redline, I mean, it revs so fast. I've driven a couple before now, but just, it's almost like an exotic car, but you can pick one up for $20,000 right now. So I think those are going to go well up, and it's never going to be $100,000 car. Well, I'm sure some are, but if you look at the 80s M3s, those for a period of time, I remember you get one for $8,000. Now those are $80,000 cars, right? The E36s, those got really cheap. Those are now 60, 50 to 60 for a good condition. E46s probably a little bit higher than that. That's like everyone's favorite, but I'm sure E90 is going to go up there just because of that V8. So that's got to be mine.
Okay. Yeah, it's a little pricier than I had in mind, but that's the segment bottomed out. That's as cheap as it's going to be. It qualifies.
Yep.
So yeah, it's an interesting one. I don't know too much about that. So this week I picked something that's a little out of my wheelhouse that you won't see coming. Not something I've ever had. I looked into buying a couple. I've searched them. Just never really found the deal that was right at the right time. But it was kind of a weird 2-year production that came out of left field. And I didn't really like them at the time. It's not my flavor. It's not my thing at all, but kind of saw the performance and it was undeniable. And that's the 03 to 05 Neon SRT4s.
Yeah.
So they're so cheap right now. I mean, I've been poking around at them, and the reason why is most of them are just giant piles of garbage because they've been.
Everybody modded the hell out of them, right, and beat on them.
And they were cheap. Kids got a hold of them. They were fast. They had endless modifications. So if you find a decent one that runs and drives, they're prone to rust in the quarter panels. Like they've all got rust in this area. The transmission synchros fail, so it has like third gear pop outs. So you'll see it in the ad. No third gear pop outs. It's like a giant selling point if it's not doing that. Super cheap, early 2000s Chrysler interior. It's a neon. It's just a really cheap car, but they made crazy power. I mean, you'd see these things that were, with a little bit of boost added to them going into the 12s, 11s, just for a cheap car when you're a kid in your early 20s. They sold a lot of them, and they could pull crazy power out of them. So a lot of them had that done to them. So there's not many nice ones left. So right now I've been seeing them anywhere from like $4,000 to like $7,000, depending on body rust and mileage and modifications. But to even find an original untouched one, I don't think I found one that doesn't have like exhaust or a bigger turbo on it. But I saw one with like 70,000 miles that was mostly stock, and it sold for $13,000 like the first day it was posted. And you'll see modded ones, like I said, from like $3,000 to $6,000 right now. But come the day when these guys that were in their 20s buying these things that destroyed them turn 45, 50, and they want to find one, and there's only 1,500 left in existence that aren't destroyed, it's going to be a car that I bet will do some decent money.
Man, that's actually a really good one. I think you're right on that. Like, but to find a clean would be impossible. Was it just one generation of those cars?
Yeah.
Okay. I remember I test drove a few of those, and I used to test drive every single car I could when I was that age. Right? Like if a dealer would let me drive it, I'd drive them. But
yeah,
I think I remember the ad at the time where they were showing that it was as fast as the Viper to 60. You might have to look that up later, but I'm pretty positive that was like a fact about it. Like obviously the Viper would just walk away from it above that speed, but they actually were pretty small, lightweight cars, and they could get up and move, right?
Yeah, so, I mean, front wheel drive, 4-cylinder. It was not really my flavor at the time, but as they came out and I saw a couple at like cruise nights, I was kind of like, wait, what? I think it'll destroy my CTSV that I just bought. Like, that's crazy. Okay.
Well, and that like started the whole.
A little bit of...
Japanese market was already into those cars, but that started the American market for those. So like the Cobalt, SS, like the Ford Focus, ST, RS, like all those cars are because of the neon existing, right? Yeah, that's cool. I think you're right. I think if
Yeah.
somebody found one of those clean, like hang on to that. There'll be like a handful of people that want them, but they'll pay big money to have it. Right.
Yeah, I think if you got like 15 grand to spend right now, just be patient and just hunt one down and just, like I said, toss it in the corner of your garage and just wait a decade, because nostalgia is a very pricey thing to buy back, and someone's going to want it. But
well, look at the Integras,
yeah, I mean,
right, from the 90s. Like those went up huge.
yeah.
And
Oh,
that's
geez.
right.
Great example. But yeah, before we close, I remember we had when I was probably in middle school, my cousin was 4 years older than me. He was in high school, and a couple kids that were like a year or two above him in school lived in his neighborhood, and they had a Dodge Neon gang. And this was before the SRT4 came out. This was like 2000, 2001. And they all had like these lime green neons and red neons, black neons with these big old exhaust pipes on the back and lowered and wheels and tinted windows and, subwoofers just cranking music. And they'd all just gather it in his driveway. And I thought it was the silliest thing. I'm like, you guys like, go buy a Mustang or a Trans Am. Like, what are you doing? Like, why are you buying a Neon? Because they weren't even fast yet, But
no,
I think they were not alone. I think Mopar read the market and saw what kids were doing. They're like, hey, that's what they want. Let's give them one.
right.
And that's how the thing was created.
That's a good one. That makes me think of one for next time that I'll have to look up to see where they're at. But all right, cool,
awesome, cool. Well, anything else you want to close on?
Nope. Thank you again.
All right. Well, yeah, guys, later. Thanks for listening. Yeah, please, leave us a review on iTunes. Head over to Instagram at the Motor Madhouse and follow us there for more memes and videos and car talk. Yeah, please rate and review on iTunes. That kind of helps boost us up in the algorithm and get more people listening. Appreciate to hear your feedback too. Any other cars that you guys are thinking of that fit into any of these episodes, we'd like to hear from you guys. So thank you.